Melvin Ernest Trotter was born on May 16, 1870, in Orangeville, Illinois, about 100 miles northwest of Chicago. He had 2 brothers and 4 sisters. His mother, Emily Jane, was a godly, Bible-believing, praying Christian. His father, William, was an alcoholic and a bartender. When Mel Trotter was 5 years old, his family moved to Polo, Illinois, 165 miles west of Chicago. In Polo, Mel's mom tried to steer Mel towards his education, but Mel was much more interested in following his father's example of drinking and gambling. He learned to serve drinks so he could fill in when his dad was passed out. At home, Mel's mom patiently prayed. When Mel was 17, his family moved 20 miles north to Freeport, Illinois. There, Mel learned to be a barber, and soon he moved to Pearl City, Iowa, to try to make it on his own. He did pretty well cutting hair, but he was still drinking and gambling. And though he worked to hide his addictions, he became known around town as the drunken barber. In Pearl City, Mel met and fell in love with a young woman named Lottie. Mel was very likable and charming when he was sober, and he was able to hide his drinking from Lottie until they were married. They wed in 1891, and it wasn't long before Lottie Trotter discovered that she had married a drunk. But she loved him, and she wanted to help him conquer his addiction. She encouraged him, and she let him know that she was 100% behind him. Mel promised over and over that he would never touch a drop of liquor again, and he meant it. But every attempt to reform ended in failure. Countless nights, after another sincere assurance from Mel, Lottie would watch him come stumbling through the door in a drunken stupor. Mel's drinking caused him to lose his barbering job. He tried selling insurance, but all he could think about all day was getting another drink. When their son was born, the Trotters decided to make a fresh start. They moved out into the country, 11 miles away from any opportunity to drink or gamble. This seemed to do the trick for Mel. Lottie was so happy. She prayed for him constantly, and she watched him very carefully. For 3 whole months, he was completely sober. Lottie was convinced it was a miracle. Then one snowy winter night, they returned home from visiting some friends. Lottie took the baby in the house, while Mel unhitched the wagon and put the horse in the barn. After a while, when Lottie realized Mel hadn't come inside, she walked out to see the horse and wagon gone, and the wagon tracks leading towards town. In town, Mel sold the horse and wagon so he could go drinking and gambling. And when he was finally broke, he trudged home 11 miles in the snow. They moved to Davenport, Iowa. There they tried everything imaginable to cure Mel, but nothing worked. Then came a 10-day stretch where Mel didn't come home at all. When he finally did stagger through the door, he found his wife Lottie holding the lifeless body of their 2-year-old son. Mel thought, I murdered my boy. As they stood together beside the casket, Mel Trotter swore to his wife that he would never touch another drop. But 2 hours later, Mel was hopelessly drunk again. He hopped in a boxcar and rode the train to Chicago. There, he sold his hat, his coat, and his shoes to go to a bar for another drink. Eventually, he was kicked out of that bar. And that's when Mel Trotter decided to take his own life. In the freezing cold, he stumbled shoeless down Van Buren Street towards the icy waters of Lake Michigan. As Mel limped down the street, he was unaware that he was approaching the Pacific Garden Mission. Standing outside the door of the mission that night was a former gambler named Tom Mackey. Tom's job was to watch for troubled people passing by and to try to steer them into the meeting. It was so cold, and the streets were so empty, that Tom was tempted to abandon his post and move inside. But as he faithfully held his ground, he noticed a bum staggering down Van Buren Street. Tom Mackey approached Mel Trotter, put his hand on Mel's shoulder, and with a kind voice said, "Come inside, friend." In a drunken stupor, Mel Trotter walked into the mission where a man was preaching to a large crowd. The preacher stopped and prayed, "Oh God, save that poor boy." Before that night was over, Mel Trotter turned to Jesus, and his life was forever transformed. God eventually used him to open the City Rescue Mission in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which he led for 40 years, and it's now named the Mel Trotter Home. Mel Trotter would have an amazing ministry, testifying throughout America, and starting a total of 67 rescue missions in 40 states. For the rest of his life, he attributed his salvation to the relentless praying of his godly mother. Christian, don't ever stop praying for your loved ones to get saved. Stay the course.